What's up, guys? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Joannis or Joe Hatagwa. I'm a Sierra Leonean American living here in Accra, Ghana. And if you want to know what is going on with the elections in Nigeria this Saturday, then this is the video for you. All right, so we are live. We're live on Twitch. We're live on LinkedIn. We're live on Facebook. We're live on YouTube. And we are live on Instagram. We're live on all platforms. If you guys can hear me, give me a thumbs up so I know you can hear me. Those of you who are watching the live from Instagram, I am going to be presenting today. So if you want to see the presentation, click on this pinned link in the description or the pin link in the comments. There's a pin link here in the comments. So go ahead and click that link if you guys want to join and see what we're presenting. And if you want to see what people are asking on the screen. So again, if you're joining from Instagram Live, click that pinned link and that'll take you directly. And if you're watching the replay, you could just go to the link in the description and it'll take you there. Give me a thumbs up so I know you guys can hear me. Let me know that you guys can hear me. Can you guys hear me on Instagram? And also, can you hear me on YouTube? I'll take a second. I'll wait for you guys to let me know that you guys can hear me. I started a little bit late today, a little bit unconventional. I was just on the line and I just got off a call. So I was able to join a little bit late. It was a very important call that I was on, so I had to be on it. Give me a thumbs up so I know you guys can hear me. Can you guys hear me? And again, if you're joining from the Instagram Live, just click the link and get over to the YouTube Live, and you'll be able to join the YouTube Live so you can see what I'm presenting today about this election in Nigeria. You know, you guys have been asking a ton about Nigeria. There's been a few folks specifically. Actually, there's a few folks that have been asking about Nigeria. And since there's an election this week, and because there's been so much going on as it pertains to this election, I thought it might make sense to talk about it. Because I think it's fascinating. For those of us who grew up in the diaspora, understanding how some of the elections work on the continent might be interesting. Nigeria is obviously the most populated country on the continent of Africa. And so, they're not necessarily the example for the continent, but it gives you a little bit of an idea of, what this could look like with a country that size. Okay, so Manelik says you can hear me. Good evening to you too. And Brown Coat Blue says, I've been wondering about this topic. Oh yeah, we're going to dive into this topic. Phoenix Mars, what's up? Shout out to everybody joining on Instagram. Feel free to jump over to the link, the pinned link in the there to join and watch what I'm showing on the screen and what everyone is saying in response to what we're going through today. So today we will be reviewing everything pertaining to the challenges with the election, violence surrounding it, what's different this time than the last time that they've had elections in Nigeria. Who are the candidates? What does a candidate need to win? Who is leading in the polls? All that kind of stuff. And just a little bit about each candidate. We're not going to get too deep into each one. But I did want to just make sure that you guys did get a little bit of an understanding. And it was fascinating to me to get more details. I have a bunch of friends from Nigeria. One of my friends actually is a Nigerian American who's in town right now. I was just at her place a little earlier, and she has a preferred candidate. I spoke to another friend of mine who's in another country. She has a preferred candidate. And then a couple of my Nigerian friends here also have that same preferred candidate. So we'll talk about that and what that could potentially mean, and what the feelings are on the ground in Nigeria. So we'll get into all of that today. It looks like Miss Elaine 121 finally made it on time. You made it on time. Thanks for joining. All right, cool. So I'm not going to waste too much more time. We're going to get right into the content. It's almost 5 minutes in. So for those of you who don't know me, especially those of you who are joining from Instagram, my name is Joannis or Joe Hatagwa. I'm a Sierra Leonean American. I do live between Accra, Ghana, and Freetown, Sierra Leone. Working on building a house in Sierra Leone right now. Own some property there, or co-own some other property too. I spend a significant amount of time traveling, especially the last 12 months. And I plan to spend more time traveling around the continent of Africa. But my channel is really all about my experience moving and what is happening here on the continent, so that we can all be more informed about what's happening here, especially those of us who are either planning to move or planning to visit. So that's really the goal here of my channel, the YouTube channel. The Instagram page is really more about sharing things that are happening in Africa and the diaspora and kind of bringing the two groups together. That's really my main goal with the Instagram page. And then I also put in some of the content I do film for YouTube. So that is a little bit about me. Phoenix Indigo says, my friends my friends there are dealing with a lot. Friends in Nigeria dealing with a lot. So we'll talk about what they're dealing with. And Phoenix Indigo says, with the money and whatnot. Yes. So there's been some issues there. And let's actually talk about that right now before we get into this. So purposefully, they made changes to the banknotes, and then didn't make those notes available in large quantities so that they could curb potential fraud and vote buying. Unfortunately, what that means for many people on the ground is that they can't go to the bank to take money out or the ATM to take money out because there aren't enough notes in circulation. So even like mobile money transfers or transfers from bank account to bank account has been really an issue. And we'll talk about that a little bit. There was a whole news cycle about this about a week ago. BBC finally reported on it and a few other stations reported on it. But I was speaking to friends who were actually going through it. And it was pretty crazy to think you can't get any of your own money out of the bank. You just can't get it out. And so there's been a lot of people struggling with that. And so that is a byproduct of this election. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. All right. So without further ado, let's just get right into the presentation. You guys came to see it. So I will get it going. Couple things before I get started. Phoenix Indigo said, didn't put enough money into circulation. Yes, that was purposeful. And they said, yep, yeah, exactly. And again, if you're joining from Instagram Live, click the link on that's pinned there if you want to see what's on the screen, because I will be presenting my screen. All right, so with that, let's start the presentation. All right, cool. So here we are. Again, as of this week, and as of last week, I am posting multiple times a week. I go live on Mondays, Thursdays, and Sundays. We'll also have other types of content, and there may be other pieces of content in between as well. So we'll talk about what that content looks like. So we'll talk about the upload dates and time. So on Mondays, of course, I go live. I talk about everything from what my week has been like, what's going on here in Ghana for me, news stories. So in particular, this election that's coming up in Nigeria on Saturday, the 25th. I've also talked to other people about their move to Ghana. And we've done everything from dating here to moving here, all those different kinds of topics. But it's a wide ranging list of topics that we cover on Mondays. We've also talked about investments on the continent of Africa. I do have 2 lives coming up in the next couple of weeks that will dive a little bit deeper into money that has been given by the World Bank, and then also investments that have gone into the energy sector and natural resources. People have asked about natural resources in Africa and what those investments were like. I did a live about the tech investments that happened last year, the over $5 billion that came to Africa in tech investments. Now I want to do something on energy and natural resources. So those will be coming in the next 2 weeks. And so that's going to be what Mondays are about, is those kinds of topics. On Thursdays, I will be doing, in general, my vlog, what that week has been like, or what a week has been like on the continent of Africa or wherever I am in the world. And then lastly, on Sundays, I'll have everything from interviews to 10 things I wish I knew, to comparisons of different countries, just my experiences, so that I can share with you guys so you guys know what is going on. So that's a little bit about what you're going to expect to see from me content-wise. And then as it pertains to staying up to date, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, share this with your friends to let people know what's going on, especially today as it pertains to the elections in Nigeria. You can share this with folks. All right. My website is launching this month. We've been running into some issues with the domain registrar. That's why it hasn't launched as of yet. But before the month is over, I do plan to launch the Authentic African website again. And we'll talk about what that is on another live when we actually launch it. We'll do a deep dive and actually look at the site itself. All right. So now on to elections in Nigeria. This has been a topic of discussion around my friend groups. And so it's something that I wanted to bring to those of you who are following the Authentic African Instagram and YouTube channels. Again, obviously, Nigeria is the most densely populated country on the continent of Africa. And so when they have elections, it's consequential and it's newsworthy. So let's talk about it, right? So this Saturday, February 25th, voters, obviously in Africa's most populous country, Nigeria, will head to the polls and they'll select their next president. And this is amid mounting unhappiness in the country. There's worsening insecurity. We'll talk about that in terms of violence and other things. And then there's also economic hardship. Now, again, we did talk about how well Nigeria did in terms of investments that came from for tech investments. And they also do really well for natural resource investments and do well financially in terms of the money they make as a country. But this is in particular pertaining to how people are feeling at the time of the election, right? So I just want to be clear. This isn't a live to be bashing Nigeria. We want to really talk about where Nigeria is and what the elections mean. But I did want to make sure I gave that context. So will any of the front runners, most of whom have been in the political system for decades, be able to turn the country around? This is a question that people are asking themselves. So let's talk about the current state of Nigeria and the current president, just so you guys kind of understand where they are and where public sentiment is right now. So really, the concerns go from inflation to deadly attacks by gunmen against innocent civilians. The 7-year rule of the now outgoing president has seen, Nigeria's faced a lot of challenges and crises, if you will. He's been called a military dictator turned reform Democrat. That is actually a quote from a news publication. And he's seen the country lurch from an economic shock from one to the next. So over 60% of the people live in poverty, while security crises are a thing that's happening. Kidnapping has happened. There are some terrorist attacks that happen within the country. There's a little bit of militancy in some of the oil-rich areas, and there are clashes between the herdsmen and the farmers, and that all has multiplied in this time of the last president. In recent weeks, there's also been shortages of fuel and cash, the latter, cash. There's been a rush, because there was a rush for currency redesign, that caused widespread suffering, which I mentioned and which Phoenix Indigo actually mentioned. Even people with money in the bank cannot get access to it, and many are unable to buy food or pay for necessities. So protests in some cities have turned violent around this. I did see a guy that worked. First of all, I saw footage at a bank of people who were trying to climb the fence, like they had a ladder to climb the fence to get away from the civilians because they were storming the bank to try to get their money. However, the supporters of the current president has said he's done his best to highlight achievements, such as working on infrastructure projects and attempts to combat violent extremism. But even his own wife has apologized to the Nigerian people for falling short on their expectations. So that is what the publications are saying about the current president. And of course, that's with what's happening on the ground in Nigeria. So what's at stake? Okay, Okay, before I get into this, there's some questions that came up. So let's really quickly address those. So based on this last discussion in terms of what we were talking about, Phoenix Indigo said, I saw a man who stripped naked in agony in the bank. Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff happening because people aren't able to get their funds. You guys might remember, I have a friend who lived in Nigeria, and she has been having issues, right? She does a lot of business there, and being able to get cash there is a really big challenge. We had actually done a transaction, and the money was sent, and the person who was supposed to receive the money couldn't pick it up. There was just no way to pick it up, so they had to reverse the payment. So what does Manelik say? Why does it seem that everyone who runs for president in Nigeria is up in age? Where are those between the ages of 35 and 55? Good question. I would say that is the $1 million question around the world, though, in general, right? In general, we see that issue. Take the United States, for instance, right? I mean, the last election, the median age of the three most prominent candidates was over 70 years old, right? Like, I think it was like 75 years old was the median age between the three candidates in the States. So if you like, I'm talking about right before it got to the general election, right? You had two candidates on the left side of the aisle, and you had one candidate on the right side of the aisle, all of which were in their mid 70s or late 70s, right? So it's not just in Nigeria, though. Phoenix Indigo answered that question. Good question. That it's old money and corruption. Okay, that's an answer. And Missy Lane is asking if Phoenix Indigo is in Nigeria. Okay, so many Nigerians see the 2023 election as a chance to change course and are planning to break with two traditional parties to vote for a third candidate. So we'll talk about that in a second. Not since the rebirth of Nigeria's democracy in 1999 has the country faced an election this quote unquote nail biting and as wide open as this one. I mean, it really is, because the incumbent is not running, right? So it's a new field of candidates and there is no incumbent running. So it really does feel like it's wide open. So Phoenix Indigo is answering the question, not right now. I have friends there now in Nigeria through this and sharing when I check in to see how they are. Yeah, it's been kind of devastating. I mean, imagine not being able to go to the ATM and take out your money, or go to the bank even and take out money. Or if you can, it's very limited amounts. If you can imagine, that is a scary place to be in, because I don't know how far in advance they were warned that this was going to happen. I can't imagine that they were. So I don't know how many people were actually prepared for this to occur. And so if you can imagine trying to go get your own money and you can't, that's a really big issue. And so that's what's happening. And so in any case, that was to curb some of the potential fraud that has been seen in previous elections. And we'll address that in a moment. Okay, so that's what's at stake. So why does this election matter, right? From recent polling, nearly 90% of Nigerians believe the country is going in the wrong direction. According to a recent survey by Afrobarometer, by far the worst perception it has ever recorded in Nigeria. So they've done other polls, and through these polls, this is what they're finding. 90% have a negative view, or view that is going in the wrong direction. So for many, this election seems to be a last-ditch chance to rescue their country, right? So there's another quick question. Can they use credit or debit cards? It seems like it was a sudden announcement in a matter of weeks. From what I understand, those who have them actually don't know. That's a good question. I don't know if they could use it, because now that I'm thinking about it, everybody I've talked to, it's been cash they've been trying to use, but they couldn't transfer money from account to account. So if they couldn't transfer money from one account to another, I'm not sure that they could use credit or debit cards, because the issue is, I don't think a bank will allow you to debit an account if they don't have enough actual funds currently in the bank itself, right? Because that was the issue, is there was a low number of actual notes physically in circulation. So I know people who've tried to send money from bank account to bank account and couldn't. So I'm not too sure you could use a credit card or a debit cards. Not too many people have credit cards there. I mean, people do, but you can use a credit card, I'm sure, if it's international, or an international debit card, yes, but I'm not really sure the local ones. So obviously, Nigeria is a nation bustling or bursting with entrepreneurs and creative talent. They say it's been held back by rampant insecurity, widespread unemployment, persistent corruption, stagnating economy, which together mean that simply surviving can be a major struggle. Young middle-class Nigerians are trying to escape this life, and they're leaving the country in droves. Now, this is, I just must say, this was either a Bloomberg or New York Times article, so there's a lot of opinion put into these words here. I'm just reading the words. These are not my words. Let me just be very clear of that. And I cite my sources in the last slide as well. So this is either New York Times or either BBC, New York Times, or Bloomberg. But anyway, it is written with opinion. So just to be clear on that. Okay, so what are some of the main issues in the country? Violence is one of the main issues. So reducing insecurity is one of the key concerns of voters. They're experiencing kidnapping for ransom, battling a militant Islamic insurgency in parts of the north. You guys might have heard of the group Boko Haram that's in the north. And it's definitely a group that has been classified as militant Islamists. Some people even have classified them as extremists and or terrorists. And so they've aligned themselves with other groups that are considered that. And so these are some of the challenges that they're dealing with, right, in the country. And then there were two really shocking cases last year where I got video footage of them, and I would not share them here. They're like, if you're going to look them up, I would definitely tell you to just be prepared. You know, if you are at all disturbed by blood or violence, I would say don't go watch them. Some people sent them to me on WhatsApp, and I didn't know what they were until I downloaded the video and pressed play. But there were two cases last year. There was a shooting at a Catholic church. And that's the picture you see depicted on the top here. So you see it on the right. This is some of what you see, the aftermath of it. I didn't want to show the picture of like the people and the blood, but you see the blood there on the ground. And then the church this is the picture of the church on the left of that. And then at the bottom, there were actually two gunmen, or actually some gunmen, I don't know how many, went to a passenger train with dozens of people, and dozens of people were killed or kidnapped in that passenger train. And this was obviously a horrific experience. And these are just some of the issues that went viral last year that I became aware of and that were widely reported in the region. There was also some protests that turned violent as well, where people were shot and killed protesting. So it's definitely something that is of concern for many. And to them, you know, this is a chance to vote in a new regime and hope that they can bring someone to help stop this. Liz Z is saying this was on the Abuja Kaduna train. So this is a train that's in between these two cities where this had happened. Okay. Thanks, Liz Z, for sharing that information. Okay. So here are some of the other main issues: the economy, unemployment, and infrastructure. So in 2022, inflation rose for 10 months in a row. And you can actually see that depicted on the graph here on the right. Unemployment is at a pretty high percentage. The National Bureau of Statistics shows that 33% of the population is unemployed. Can you imagine? 33% of the population is unemployed. So quick question from Anderson. Anderson said, why are you misrepresenting facts? Debit cards are frequently used and there is no restriction on funds transfer. The currency redesign is mainly to discourage cash transactions. So Anderson, thank you for sharing your experience. And maybe you didn't have an issue getting money out of the bank or transferring funds, but I spoke to 4 people who actually had issues transferring funds, 4 people on the ground who told me, I wasn't asking them, I wasn't like a reporter calling them to ask them, they were complaining the challenge that they were having on the ground. So if you saw something different, please share what banks do it, because I do want to share that with them so they can try going to those banks or using debit cards from those banks if they have bank accounts with them, because they were having other issues. Now with the debit cards, I said I don't know. That was something that I said I'm not really 100% sure. But Anderson, are you 100% sure that all banks debit cards are working and there are no restrictions on fund transfers? And if you are, which particular banks? If you do know that in particular, please do share it, because I want to share that with those folks. But I can tell you right now, they told me that's something different. So Anderson, if you can share the actual facts that you say are facts, I would love to share that with the group. But I appreciate you stepping in and engaging in the discussion. Lenora says, hello, what's up, Lenora? How are you? And Lizzie is saying folks had issues. Yes, many folks had many issues. But maybe it's on specific banks. I mean, Anderson seems to have facts that I don't have. So if Anderson can share, I'd love to share that with the group, so that Liz, you can talk to your folks, and Phoenix, you could talk to your folks, and then I can talk to my folks, and maybe we can point them in the right direction, if in fact it was misrepresented by them and other folks on the ground. Lastly, infrastructure. 4 out of 10 Nigerians live below the poverty line, and lack of education and access to basic infrastructure such as electricity, safe drinking water, and improved sanitation. So that's 4 out of 10. So that's 40% of the country. This is obviously based on rough statistics, live below the poverty line. So 33% unemployed, 40% of the people live below the poverty line and are dealing with some or all of the issues I mentioned here. So these are all the reasons why people are invigorated about voting in this next election. Will this election bring change? That is a great question. I saw this question and I thought to myself, I always wonder that as well. Now, this picture on the right is like a political cartoon, and the idea is depicting the challenges that people see on the ground in Nigeria when it comes to the voted in politicians, right? The folks that are in place. So you see how they said fixing the nation is one way. You see the infrastructure challenges, right? You can see the cracked road, et cetera, et cetera. And you see the politicians walking the other way, right? It's depicting the fact that they're looking to get elected, but are they really looking to fix the nation? So anyway, many of the candidates have put these issues at the center of the campaign, so the issues I described previously. But these problems have been mounting for several years, leaving obviously many or some Nigerians skeptical about whether whoever wins the election will actually be able to fix them. I just had a conversation with a friend of mine today who said exactly that. Despite the large number of registered voters, 93.5 million, that's a lot of registered voters. That is a huge number of registered voters. Concerns persist about apathy and how many people will actually show up on the day to cast their ballot. With almost 40% of registered voters under 34, the vote has been called the election of young people by their elections chief, Mahmoud Yakubu. So before I move on, let me see if there's any other questions, comments, thoughts from folks. Anne-Marie Harding is here. Hello, Anne-Marie. I'm well. How are you? Hope you are doing well. Thanks for joining. All right, cool. Any questions, comments, thoughts, concerns in the meantime? We'll keep moving, but just let me know. Just put them in the comments and we'll stop to address them. And then again, and those of you who are joining from Instagram Live, there is a pinned link in the comments here. Just click the pinned link and join the YouTube Live so you can see what I am presenting on the screen. And there's a bunch of people that have joined, jumping in and out. So just wanted to wave to them quickly and say hello. Thanks for joining, guys. There is a pinned link there in the comments, so feel free to join the YouTube Live. All right, cool. So who are the main candidates? So there are actually a total of 18 candidates who are campaigning for the president role, but only 3 or 4 technically have a realistic chance of winning. So here are the 4 main candidates that people are most familiar with. There's Peter Obi from the Labour Party. He actually left, I think, the People's Democratic Party. So you have Atiku Abubakar, who's from the People's Democratic Party. You have Bola, who's from the All Progressives Congress. And then you have Rabiu. Is it Rabiu? I don't know how to pronounce his name. who's seeming like the least likely of the four, if I'm not mistaken, to win. But we'll talk about all of them. He's from the New Nigeria's People's Party. And so, if I'm not mistaken, the two main parties in the country are the People's Democratic Party and then the All Progressives Congress. Those are the two main parties. So the two separate parties that are now being represented are the Labour Party and the New Nigeria People's Party. And so if you can think about this in the United States, right, the United States technically has multiple political parties, but there's two main parties. And then you have some people who join other parties like the Green Party or the Libertarian Party in the US, right? Or independents. Okay, so let's start with Bola. So he's from the All Progressives Congress. He's 70 years old. He's standing for the governing All Progressive Congress Party. He's known as the political godfather of the Southwest region. He wields a huge amount of influence, but has been dogged by allegations of corruption over the years, poor health, both of which he denies. He denies poor health or the corruption claims that have been made against him. He is a canny, multimillionaire, former governor of Lagos, which is obviously Nigeria's biggest city. He's a Muslim from the Southwest and boasts that he was the one who helped bring the previous president into power. His catchphrase is a Yoruba phrase, which I'm not even going to try, but it basically stands for "It's my turn." And this, to him, speaks to his record as a kingmaker in Nigerian politics. But they say that it alienates young voters. You know, we had the same situation in the United States, if you remember, in 2016, although that wasn't somebody's political wasn't their campaign slogan. You might remember it kind of felt like it was her time, and it alienated many voters. And so this may be the same thing that is happening with Bola, and we will see this Saturday and beyond if it does actually alienate voters. Okay, so this is Anderson. Anderson is actually coming back now to respond to the statements about whether or not cash was being able to be used. So Anderson is saying that, yes, all banks allow the use of debit cards and there is no restrictions on fund transfers. There are several payment platforms, and I cannot speak for all banks. I don't have problems with my banks. What bank do you use, though, so that we can tell people which banks are actually working? So you have a couple of banks that you use. I do want to make sure I mention those to folks, because I can tell you right now, the folks that I've been talking to, they haven't been able to transfer funds. So if you can help us with that information, I'd love to share that. Thank you, Anderson. All right, so back to the different candidates. So Mr. Abubakar, who is who's 76, and he's running on behalf of, obviously, the main opposition, the People's Democratic Party, PDP. He has run for presidency 5 times before, all of which obviously he's lost. That kind of reminds you of the current president of the United States. He ran for presidency, if I'm not mistaken, between 3 and 5 times previously and lost. So there's definitely some parallels you can see. Obviously very different in terms of political ideology, things like that, but just saying, like, these are things that people are looking at and dealing with and how voters are making decisions, right? So most of his career has been what they consider in the corridors of power, having worked as a top civil servant. He was vice president previously, and he's also been a prominent business person. He's also been accused of corruption and cronyism, which of course he's also denied. He's a Muslim as well, but he's from the north. And he hopes to pick up far more votes there than he has in the past. Now that he doesn't have to run against the current president, who is no longer running, who also had a big following in the north. So he's hoping to be able to pick up those votes from the current president, who had a big following in the north. Peter Obi of the Labour Party. Now, Peter is the guy that all the young people are supposedly loving. And that picture is him, of course, at the top. You can see the image at the bottom. The image at the bottom is one of his rallies. So this kind of is reminiscent of something that happened in America, where you had somebody who had a lot of rallies and you had a new constituency of people coming out to vote. And it seems as though there's a potential for Peter to have that same kind of impact in Nigeria. Now he's trying to break up the two-party system, which has dominated Nigeria since the end of military rule in 1999. And he's running on the Labour Party, which is a much smaller party. He is a wealthy businessman and served as the governor of the southeastern region, is it Anambra State, from 2006 to 2014. His backers are known as the Obedience, because he's Obi, right? Mr. Obi. They call themselves the Obedience. They say he's the only candidate with integrity, but his critics argue that a vote for him is a wasted vote because he's unlikely to win. This is one of those conversations that they have when they talk about third parties, right? When you have a third party in other countries, in other elections, those third parties take away from the main party candidates. And so some people do feel like voting for him may take away from the other potential candidates. It could be a wasted vote, or judging by all these people at the rally, there's a potential that maybe he could win. And there's some evidence to potentially say that he may actually win. And we'll talk about that in a second. He's been hailed as a savior by a large chunk of Nigeria's digitally savvy youth. He's also a Christian. And his fans, mostly young, are Southern Nigerians, and they're the ones dealing with economic hardship, joblessness, and the insecurity. So there's a lot of people who do believe that he could be the one. And we'll talk about how everyone is faring in terms of polling. Polling is some kind of an indicator, but it's definitely not an end-all be-all. As we've seen in many elections around the world, polling only tells you a portion of the story. Kwame says, this is a very important subject that you were talking about tonight. Thank you, Kwame. I appreciate it. I thought so too, and I thought it made sense to talk about it. So I'm happy that you found it that way. Those of you from joining from, so Queen Jujubee says, he does have the votes of the youth. So it seems. And Queen, and all of you joining from Instagram Live, you can click that pinned link to join the YouTube Live, and you can watch along with what I have on the screen, and also as I put comments up on the screen. Oh, Okimut says Bola is his guy. Okay, Okimut is with Bola. Okay. I have 3 friends that are all with Peter, none of which are voting. So I don't know. They all like Peter though. But you know, to each is their own. And then lastly, the People's Democratic Party. Wait, sorry. No. Not the People's Democratic Party. Is it the People's Democratic Party? No, sorry. Excuse that. That is a typo. It's not the People's Democratic Party. It's the New Nigeria's People's Party. So the NNPP, the New Nigeria People's Party, not the People's Democratic Party. Forgive me. Barabiu, I think is how you pronounce his name. 66. He's unlikely to win, as they say. He is also a Muslim, but he could profoundly affect the result by potentially splitting votes in parts of Nigeria's north, including a major state of Kano, which I know some people actually know a company that's there, where he has a huge base. So there's a potential that he could split some of the other votes from the major party candidates, especially Atu, who is, I think he's the one who wanted to get votes from the north, right? So there's a potential that he could take some of those votes. Now, who's likely to win? Here's what the polling says. So several recent polls have put Mr. Obi ahead of his rivals, and that's the guy who is the tech savvy folks are loving him for, ahead of his rivals, some by a wide margin. But what many of these surveys have in common is that it's a large proportion of people polled refuse to say who they're voting for or say they're undecided. So many of those are unaccounted for, even though you see what it's saying. So what these polls are saying is in a low turnout scenario, it's likely that Bola from the All Progressives Congress will win. In a high turnout scenario, it's saying it's more likely that Peter will win. Again, we are speaking to a small subset of the population and a group of folks who were polled that did not respond favorably in terms of any one particular candidate. Either they said they were undecided, or they refused to say who they were voting for. So this is what you can see in terms of those who are vocal. This is where the country is in terms of who they're going to vote. So now, what actually does a candidate have to do to win? But before we get into that, there's a few comments and concerns. So let's see. So Liz Z is saying that I think Rabiu is the former governor of Kano. Okay, that might make sense why he has such a high, or so many people like him in Kano. That might make sense. Okimu says, as for banking, there are lots of fintech platforms in Nigeria, like OPay, for instance. There are. And they might actually work for moving money. I'm not really sure. Again, those of you who are joining from Instagram Live, we're talking about the elections in Nigeria this Saturday. If you want to see what I'm presenting on the screen, you can click on the pinned link there. And if you want to see what people are saying on the screen as well. Now, this is what Jack Jackson has to say. This election is critical for Nigeria and Black people globally. We need a strong Black nation at the power table. This will be interesting to see what this election means in Nigeria, across West Africa, across the continent, and across the diaspora. We'll see what impact it has. Only time will tell. Liz Z says, getting actual cash has been a big issue. Not enough new currency. They were restricting cash withdrawals. Okay, so we're back on we're still talking about the cash situation. So yeah, okay. So what does this candidate need to win? So here's what it takes. An absolute majority plus, so an absolute majority, meaning the majority of the votes, right? And 25% of the vote in 2/3 of the nation's 36 states are essential for victory. So again, an absolute majority, one, and then the other criteria is 25% of the votes in 2/3 of the 36 states. So 2/3 of 36, I do not do math in public, but I'm going to say that's probably about 28 or so. Nope, probably like 26 or so. So maybe around 26, 25 or so of the states, you will need at least 25% of the vote, on top of an absolute majority across the country in order to win. If no candidate achieves this, the election will go to a runoff, which, by the way, has never happened since democracy returned in 1999. But now analysts say this is probably a distinct possibility because there are 4 candidates now. And with 4 candidates, you open up the voter pool, and it makes a more evenly distributed number of votes likely to happen. And so you may not get a supermajority. Now, turnout is usually extremely low. Around only 35% of registered voters voted in the last election because of the same things: insecurity, logistical problems, and apathy. According to the INEC, that's an acronym that has to do with, okay, the Independent National Electoral Commission. More than 12 million new voters have registered, most of them young people. Now, this election result may hinge on whether those new voters turn out or not. Results are expected 2 to 3 days after the election, because that's how it's happened over the last few elections. All right. So as far as like the Nigerians themselves, how to vote, right? So what does a Nigerian need to vote? In order to vote, you need to have a valid permanent voter's card, a PVC, which essentially shows that you are registered to vote and proves the identity of the voter. The PVC also contains biometrical data, meaning thumbprint, of the voter, used as further verification on election day. This data is stored in the card. However, there is limited time, as the deadline for getting a PVC was, this is from an older article, was February 5th. So if you didn't do it by then, you couldn't do it. To cast their ballot, you need to arrive at the polling station between the hours of 8 a.m. and 2 p.m. with their PVC. As long as they're in the line or queue to vote by 2 p.m., they will be allowed to cast their vote. At least that's what INEC says. Nigerians living in the diaspora are not allowed to vote abroad. So you must be in the country to vote. Now, going back to some of the candidates, Okimute has some thoughts on Bola. Okimute says, Bola is unfairly accused of many things. Some may be true, majority are not true, but he is a true Pan-African, and even once co-authored a book with the Black American on Nigerian economy. Okay. And that is why I think Okimute likes Bola. Phoenix Indigo says, I'm definitely asking my friends for informational purposes about the debit and credit card situations and transfers. Yeah, it'll be good to know. And then we can share that information with folks so everybody knows what they can do if they're in the country during the next few days, because the election is on Saturday. So here's a question that people have. Will the election be a free and fair election? That is a real question that people have and they're worried about. Now, one, using biometric data, because there's new technology that is supposed to ensure that voters' identities and results will be real results. This was done. So, and also sending results electronically rather than manually, that was also put in place to prevent the tampering and the vote rigging that have undermined previous elections. There are also new laws. It is illegal for voters to take phones into polling booths and take pictures of their ballot papers, because I think that was also that's something you see in other countries too, right? There are people that don't allow for you to take your phone in or to take pictures of your ballot or to say anything about who you're voting for, different things like that. So it seems to be something that they picked up on in order to try to minimize the potential for corruption. And then the recent changes to the Naira notes, which we've discussed earlier. So this forced a crash crunch that can make vote buying difficult. And security agents also arrest suspects who either give or receive money at the ballots for specific votes, because they were actually in previous elections just money exchanged hands for votes. People were out, candidates had people out paying people to vote for specific people, and so they've looked to put new laws into place to curb some of these challenges to ensure that it is a free and fair election. Some of the other things that'll be different beyond the other things I just mentioned. There are kind of these unofficial rules that seem to be no longer in place. You know how in the United States, especially those of you who are from the US, you know that there are kind of unofficial rules in place. Like in the US, every presidential candidate submits their tax returns, right? In the 2016 election, that was not done by who went on to be the president, right? And so you realize that that's actually not a law, that is just kind of an unofficial rule. And so in Nigeria, they have 3 unofficial rules that have been kind of broken in this election. And generally, it's a battle between 2 established parties, right? And Peter Obi, or Mr. Obi, broke this when he left the PDP ticket and joined the Labour Party, right? And then also, too, another unofficial rule is that the presidency is supposed to alternate between the North and the South. So Mr. Buhari is a Northerner, and so Mr. Abubakar was expected to let a Southerner helm his party, but he did not, and he may pay the price by losing the PDP's traditional Southern strongholds. And we'll have to see if that bears true. That is what they seem to think. And then thirdly, there should be a Muslim and a Christian on the ticket. But Mr. Tinubu, a Muslim, didn't follow that rule because he also picked a Muslim from the Northeast as his running mate. This could potentially cost him in the South. So these are 3 unofficial rules that have kind of been in play from previous elections that are now changed and have not been followed in this particular election. So violent attacks and fraud allegations. I have friends in Nigeria right now who, and then I have friends who have all left. Like if they were living in major cities and their family is from one of the outer provinces or smaller towns, they've gone to their states and they're back at home with their families. I actually have a friend who just left university to go back to their hometown, home state, to be at home with family. So the INEC, which is, I mentioned to you before what the acronym stands for, but I don't have it off the top of my head. Oh, the Independent National Electoral Commission. They've been attacked a couple of times in the run-up to the vote, which is really concerning. So last November, they had an emergency meeting over those attacks in its buildings. There was obviously considered a disturbing trend by local media and all those who are watching. But in one attack, assailants in the southeastern state set fire to one of the independent offices. So one of the INEC's offices, and so nearly 50 of the commission's offices have already been destroyed since Nigeria's election the last time in 2019. And that was basically taken from local reports compiled by the Associated Press. But if you can imagine, 50 or so of their offices have been destroyed since 2019, according to local reports. Electoral violence, including protests challenging official results, has often hit Nigeria's elections, of course, because people do fear that, it's not free and fair. And at least 800 people died in post-election violence after the 2011 polls. So it can happen. So Anderson is talking about how a president can win. So let me pull that up here. Anderson is saying, on the contrary, the Constitution prescribes a simple, not absolute majority of the votes cast. Thus, a winning candidate must win a simple majority and 25% score in 24 states and Abuja. Okay, there you go. All right, so this is pretty interesting, right? Can you imagine whatever country you are from, you are a person who wants to work for elections, but the place that you worked has been burnt down, or 50 have been destroyed since the 2019 election. I think that causes a little bit of distress and uncertainty, right? And so that is something that Nigeria is suffering from, and that has in the past definitely suppressed votes. And so we'll see if that does have an impact on voting this time. Like I mentioned, I know a few people who are in Nigeria who are not voting. They're staying at home. They do not want any parts of this process, which is unfortunate, but that is just the nature of what it is for some people. So let's talk about fraud and the fraud allegations. So there have been many complaints about suspicious voter registration. Last year, there were some digital folks who uncovered voter cards on the digital digital electoral register that appeared to have pictures of children on them. And the legal age to vote in Nigeria is 18. So obviously you can't have children on a voter ID card, right? Some others on the preliminary list seem to have registered more than once by changing their facial expression, clothes, or the way they were sitting. So imagine you just wear a different shirt, have a different facial expression, and try to register the vote with two different voter cards. So some of the solutions that are in place to try to fix this, right? So on the 11th of January, the INEC released a new register from which it said 53,264 ineligible voters had been removed. It also said that underage voters and vote buyers will be prosecuted. So they are really looking to try to minimize the potential fraud in the voter and in the voting process, in the election process. All right, let's move on to the next slide. So those are all the changes that they've made and what they are expecting. Any questions, comments, or concerns? That went by way faster than I expected. It's 54 minutes in. But that's all I got for you today. Any thoughts, comments, questions? Do I have any? Okay, this is what I want to ask. Anybody out there who's watching this that can vote in Nigeria and is voting, and if you are, who are you voting for? If you feel comfortable saying it, I'm interested to see what people say. Is anybody voting? And if they are, who are they voting for? Definitely let me know. Okay, those of you who are joining from Instagram, I did pin a link there. You can join the YouTube live if you want. Do you have current race polling? Yes, they do have current polls, and the polls are as follows. This is what it looks like, Bronco Blue. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I'll leave that up on the screen for this question. So, but again, you know, the ballots haven't. I don't know if people have done. I don't know if they have early voting, if they've casted ballots. That hadn't come up in any of the things that I've talked about. But I think more likely than not, Saturday is when we'll know a little bit more, and then of course within 3 days after that, I think is when they plan to have the final results. But this is what the current polling suggests. Peter Obi will win. If there is a high turnout scenario, it suggests he will not if it's a low turnout scenario. I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind, though, is, again, this polling is lacking a ton of data. Jack Jackson says, are there observers from the West coming to observe this time? I'm not sure. I hadn't seen any talk about that in particular. So I don't know. That's a good question, though. And I didn't see anything in particular about this. The INEC, I looked at their site and they didn't mention anything on this either. So, but we'll have to look into that and see. Any questions, comments? Anybody who have a vote that they're voting for? Or anybody who's in the Nigerian diaspora who's been paying attention and has a candidate that they would favor, and if they were voting, they would vote for. So Okimu says there are 36 states plus Abuja, and the president must have 25% in each of those states. Well, as far as I understand, he needs 25% in 2/3 of those states, which I think is what Anderson was talking about, which was 24 states. And then also, of course, have a specific amount of the votes in the capital, Abuja. That is what I understand it to be. That is correct. Okimi says, so there are 6 regions and a president must be able to come first and second all through mostly. I guess that's what that's what the majority means, I guess. Kwame says, let's hope that the election is peaceful. Yes, let's hope that it's peaceful. And then when the time comes around Sierra Leone, I'll do, because this is an election year in Sierra Leone as well. And so I'll do some coverage of that as well and let you know how that's going. I have some people on the ground in Sierra Leone. I will be leaving right before the election, about a month or so, 2 months before the election, not right before the election, 2 months before the election. So I'll be there, but I won't be there for the election. But I'll let you guys know how it's going in real time, and whatever information I can gather from people on the ground at the time. But yeah, let's hope that it's peaceful. You know, my friends, I have friends who actually just know 2 people who just traveled this week because they did not want to be there for the elections. They traveled to Ghana from Nigeria this week. And then I have another friend who is not going back to Nigeria until after the new political party or whoever wins is in place. Then they're going. So yeah, I mean, we're definitely in a place now where people are a little worried about their safety during this election. Any other questions for me? Thoughts, comments? I see nobody wanted to say who they wanted to win, so we'll leave that out of this. So Phoenix Indigo says, I have some friends who really like the Igbo candidate. Nice. Okimu says nothing stops it from being peaceful, though. Kwame says Nigeria is very important. Let's hope things can get better. Yes, for the larger majority of folks, right? I mean, we've talked about this, as a country, it has the highest GDP on the continent of Africa, the most tech investments last year. From what I see, the biggest investments in terms of natural resources as well, which, like I said, I'll do a live in a week or so about that. And so there is a ton of potential. It just seems like the disparity between the have and the have-nots is too great and needs to be overcome. And it would seem that as a country, the wealth is concentrated in very specific areas, and there isn't a ton done to do as much as possible to help those surrounding those areas, let's say, who are mostly impacted by just the current economic climate in the country. So, yes. What is Okemu says, for me, it's is it Tinubu? That is what I want. Got you. Phoenix Indigo says it's already not peaceful though, as a direct result of election related things. Yeah. I mean, as I mentioned, INEC has had a couple of issues. There have been protests, and they've been opening fire on people in the protests. So it really has been a quite an issue. Sorry, I'm losing. I think I seem to be losing my voice. I don't know what's going on there. That happens from time to time. So, so I do want to pull up something as it pertains to the issue at the banks, because there was an article written about this. The BBC did an article. And I want to see what they said. So they said, okay, 5 days ago. So banks were attacked in Wari and Benin City. You guys have to see what this looks like. It's let me share the screen. So you can see the long lines outside of the banks. So angry protests have broken out some Nigerian towns and cities as people struggle to get a hold of new banknotes. Reportedly, they set fire to 2 commercial banks in Wari and Benin City. There have been long lines at the ATMs, people sleeping outside of banks. I did see images of people sleeping outside of banks. Yeah. So, I mean, that's basically what's being said here. Not too much, but that's what the BBC was reporting on, which is, I mean, pretty incredible to think about, right? Like if you're looking at this image here and you're thinking to yourself, can you imagine what it must be like to try to just get your own money out of your own bank account? But we'll see if it actually leads to a free and fair election, if those things were put in place. One thing I say about Nigeria, when people talk about how Nigeria is stressful, in particular Lagos, in some ways, some of the things are stressful because they purposely put things in place that are meant to curb corruption, curb bribery and crime and things like that. And so, even though they can be minor or major inconveniences, ideally it's meant to be able to put a halt to some of the things that are plaguing the country. Like I went to take out money out of my own bank, and I could not while I was there. Not my own bank, sorry. I sent myself money because I didn't have a bank verification number, a BVN. And in Nigeria, you have to apply for a BVN before you can take money out of a bank account, or if you can even take money from a bank. So like I sent money to myself using a remittance company, and I couldn't take the money out because I didn't have a BVN. Okay, Ilkimute says, Phoenix, it's peaceful if not for this mad cash crush issue. Phoenix Indigo says cash equals election related. I'm not saying it's a war zone. Okay. Anne Marie Harding says, Uhuru Kenyatta will be the AU's chief election observer. Okay, so does that mean that they'll be there in person? That's interesting to know. Okay, good information and insight. I love that the subscribers of this channel always add really good information and insight to these lives. All right, guys, is there anything else that we got to talk about before we go? I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have any questions or thoughts on anything that you feel I haven't covered thus far, be more than happy to answer them for you. Excuse me. Sorry about that. I'll take one more sip of water, give a second for one more question before we call it a wrap. All right, guys. Well, if you know anybody who is planning on vote, who's going to exercise their constitutional right to vote in Nigeria, definitely send them this video. It might help them understand some of the things happening around them. Anybody else you know who is thinking about going to Nigeria at all and is ever planning to move back, plans to vote, all this information I think could be helpful. So make sure you share this with them. So Okimute says, so the youth prefer Obi, but Tinubu's presidency would be great too. I guess we'll have to see. We'll have to see. Anderson says the influence of the West is another factor. Another factor on the violence or on the candidates being chosen. Let me know for sure what you think, Anderson. Phoenix Indigo says, nope. Super informative as always, Mr. Joe. Thank you. I like the Mr. Joe. Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Well, thank you for joining. I appreciate it. I think it's always great to have you. In 2015, Barack Obama interfered with the presidential election, and this is bad. What exactly did he do? Can you remind me of what he did during this time? I'm interested to hear what Barack did in 2015 for the Nigerian presidential election. Phoenix Indigo says, I can't wait to return to Niger, but not election season. You and everybody else I've talked to, everybody's waiting till the election season's over. But yes, I think this has always been it's as always a fruitful conversation. I learned a lot in this process, about Nigerian elections and the election process. I was not familiar. And so this is also helpful for me. So I like doing these lives because it forces me to learn new information. Even having this YouTube channel, I meet new people, learn a lot of new information. And so I'm excited to share it with you all. And I'm glad that you guys find it useful. Again, I am going to be going live again next Monday and the following Monday. And in those 2 Mondays, barring any changes, maybe I do an interview with someone, I will be doing a live on the World Bank and the grants and the funding that they've given to the continent of Africa over the last year and the last couple of years, and where that funding has supposedly been allocated. So that's one. And then 2, I'm doing another live, and that's either going to be next Monday or the following Monday. And that will be on the investments in natural resources on the continent of Africa. I remember a few weeks back, I did investments in the tech sector, right? I'm now going to do investments in the natural resources. That was something that came up. You guys have asked about it. So I will be definitely sharing that. You come and vote, Joe. Who would you be voting for? Well, I can't vote because I have to be a Nigerian citizen to vote. And I am not a Nigerian citizen, although I'm 12.5% Yoruba. I'm not a Nigerian citizen, so I couldn't vote. To be honest with you, who I would vote for is hard to say. Based on the bit of information I've been given so far, I would likely have gone with maybe Peter, but I have no idea, to be honest. It's really difficult to say. Really difficult to say. I am a West African, but unfortunately, as a West African, I cannot vote in Nigeria. All right, cool. Well, guys, thanks for watching. As always, I always appreciate the all of you joining and, of course, engaging in the discussion. It's always great to have you guys on. And with that, I want to say I wish good luck to all of those voting in Nigeria that, you know, it is a free and fair election and that they are safe, and all turns out well. Thanks for watching. See you all on the next video.